Today, I would like to show you how to use the Behringer X Touch Mini to effectively complement the Yamaha Modx, although today it is less interesting for the assembly since it already has enough controls. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to my channel, I would really appreciate it. And if you like the video, feel free to leave a like as well. I have already explained the Behringer X Touch Mini in detail in another video, which I link above in the info box. It has 8 knobs with LED boundaries, and you can also press down on them to use them as push encoders. It has 16 pads in 2 rows. It has a layer A and a layer B, which means you can assign all controls twice, and it has a fader that can also be assigned separately. I have also received questions about whether I can use the 8 encoders of the Behringer X Touch Mini to simulate the 8 knobs of the Yamaha Modx, or to create them at all, since the Yamaha Modx only has 4. This is the first question. The second question is whether I can switch scenes or mute with the pads. I cannot mute, but I can switch scenes, and I want to know if I can start effects with the other 8 pads. And how all of this works I would like to show you right away. So let's first go to the Yamaha Modx and set it up accordingly, or check what is set there. We are now in the utility menu, and here under settings, under MIDI I/O, which stands for MIDI input output, we can see very prominently MIDI in-out, MIDI USB. In this case, it actually doesn't matter at all, because the USB input always receives signals from controllers and other keyboards. It doesn't matter whether it says MIDI or USB. This has been the case since a certain software version, I have no idea, at some point something like that. I don't know if that was the case before, as I didn't have the device then, but that's the important thing at this point regardless. Now we see a few more things that we can adjust, including the scene CC, which currently shows 92. This means that the scene buttons are currently controlled by controller 92, and for each individual button, from 1 to 8 in this case, a different value can be entered. The first button has a range from 0 to 16, the next one from 16 to 32. I will show this again when we set up the Behringer X Touch Mini in the editor. We can also change this value 92, but it makes sense to leave it as is, because you don't know what else might be affected. I will address the fundamental topic of CC, or controller number, in another video, and explain exactly what can be done with it. Now let's take a look further. We see down here on the right control number, so let's go in there and see some other numbers that are assigned. CC16 is for the ribbon controller, and 2 is for the breath controller. We do not have either of them on the Yamaha Modx. That's why we don't care about it anyway. This means we could also set the scene CC to 16 or 2, but it doesn't matter. What we see here are the assign buttons. Those are the knobs. These have the CCs from 17 to 24 and may still be of interest to some. Assign switch 1 and switch 2 above with degrees 86 and 87. On the right side we see scene CC 92 again, and here we can change the controller value of the scene buttons if we want to. However, we will leave it as it is for now. That would complete the settings for the scene buttons. Let's go back to the performance overview and talk about how we could handle that with the effects. The process of assigning effect sounds to each pad is a bit more complicated. You can assign a note value to each pad on the Behringer, and it's best to choose one that is outside the range of the keyboard you normally use. That would be from C1 to C5 on my 61 key instrument, and then I naturally take a value that is lower. I'll show that right now as well. For the 73 and 88, of course, it will be different accordingly. How do you set the effect sound sensibly now? We go into a timbre through Edit and can then theoretically load a waveform into any element. Either a single effect sound that is already in the device, or we click on New Waveform and can then distribute as many waveforms as we like across the keyboard, thus having them in one timbre. I will show how to add all the effect sounds we want in another video. Let's switch to the editor for the Behringer X Touch Mini. I have already started the editor and explained how to use it fundamentally as well as its limitations in another video, which I will link to you above in the info box. Now, let's just start as if we have already prepared everything. When we go to the fader, we see the adjustment options here. My Yamaha Modx responds to channel 1, so I will set it to channel 1 now. And because I want to control the volume with it, meaning the overall loudness, I set the type to CC. Enter the number 7, because I now know that 7 is for volume, for example, and 11 is for expression. Then I set the minimum value to 0 and the max to 127 to cover the full volume range. Next, we are at the encoder. In the upper area, we see the push function. I don't need that right now. Instead, I want to use the turn function. That's in the lower area. And I have now set everything to channel 1 because the Yamaha Modx, as mentioned, responds on channel 1. Next, we will set the CC numbers, which we should have remembered from earlier, or we can just take another look at the device, which I will do now as well, and they would be from 17 onwards. I will now set up a CC17 and CC18 for the first ones, just so you can see how it works. I'm too lazy for everyone right now because I also have to postpone it, or rather, I have to save it back again later. Next, I need to set the minimum and maximum value, for which I will again use 0 and 127. In order to utilize the full range of values when I want something different, I can do that in the Yamaha Modx, and I also set the LED ring to respond the way I want it to. Next, let's move on to the button side. Here, I would like to set the top row of buttons, which I just selected, buttons 1 to 8, as seen in the bottom left. First, set them all to channel 1, because the Modx responds on channel 1. Then plug in the CC numbers. I need to choose 92, as we saw earlier, and then set the minimum and maximum value. For scene 1 we enter 0 for both, for scene 2 16, for scene 3 32, and then it continues in increments of 16 until we reach scene 8. I will do this again only for the first two to show that it works. Now I switch to pads 9 to 16 at the bottom, set channel 1 again, and then instead of CC, I set note. And then I can select the note. I now know that my lowest C is C1, so I choose a B and B flat BB0 as notes 2 trigger effects, and then we switch back to the Yamaha Modx, so to the device. Now we continue with the device. We have set up the Behringer X Touch Mini on PC or Mac with the editor, unfortunately only with Windows, as reminded in the info box. We are now connecting it via USB-A to the Modx, and we can already see connecting to USB device. In the best case, if I have done everything correctly, the scenes should be able to switch now. You can see here that scene 1 is lit up. At least I hope you can see that. And when I click on scene 2 lights up. And back again, of course, also to scene 1. 3 doesn't work. I haven't programmed it. So that works already. For the knobs, you can't see anything right now. I first need to go into performance mode, and then you can see that when I move knob 1 here, it is reflected on the display above. I hope you can really see this. I'll make it a bit larger so that knob 1 is shown moving. And the same works of course with button 2. Yes, that's wonderful. It worked out well. So the volume control doesn't work right now because I don't have any sound connected, so you can't hear it. That's why I'm showing it again with the knobs. You can see the LED boundaries changing, and hopefully you can also see that on the display. I will now show the effects sound only in theory. For example, I would take timbre 6 and would go to C1 here. Then set my H0, the sound, and I could now play the H0 with the pad. If I have my own samples loaded there, I could of course set it to A0 to H0, and then play that sound with the 2 lower pads, meaning that single note. Unfortunately, you cannot play chords with the Behringer. However, you could use a Korg nanopad, or there are certainly other options that can do that.